They say history is written by the victors. But what about the places themselves? The ancient stones, the forgotten timbers. Do they hold on to the whispers of the lost? The echoes of the wronged? What if a place doesn't just remember, but actively participates? What if it wants its story told, no matter the cost to those who listen? This is the story of the Becker family, a story of a dream home that became a living nightmare, a story about a house that wasn't just haunted, but hungry. Leanne and Jerry Miller had spent years searching for it, the perfect family home. Not just a house, but a sanctuary, a place where their two young children, Darla and Sam, could grow up with wide open spaces, away from the city's ceaseless drone. They found it, nestled deep in the countryside, a sprawling old farmhouse with a wraparound porch and towering oak trees that seemed to guard the property. It was listed at an impossibly low price, a detail that should have raised red flags, but their real estate agent just shrugged it off as an eager seller. It felt like fate. It felt like a dream. From the moment they stepped inside, it had a particular feel. Not oppressive, not immediately terrifying, but ancient. Like it had seen 1,000 seasons, 1,000 lives. The air was cool, even on a summer day. The floorboards creaked with every step, but it was theirs. They moved in quickly, eager to start their new life. Darla, their quiet, imaginative daughter, immediately claimed the sunniest room upstairs. Sam, a boisterous 5-year-old, loved exploring the vast backyard. For a few weeks, it was everything that they'd hoped for. The first anomalies were so subtle, so easily dismissed, they barely registered. Leanne would find the kitchen cabinets slightly ajar, even after she'd explicitly closed them. Jerry swore he heard faint, unfamiliar music coming from the empty upstairs hallway in the dead of night, attributing it to a neighbor's distant radio. Darla began talking to an invisible friend she called Lily, which they wrote off as a normal phase for a creative child. But then came the doors. Always the doors. They began to open and close on their own. Not slamming shut, but slowly, silently swinging open an inch or two, revealing the darkness of the next room. They'd bolt them, wedge them, even try to lock them. But hours later, they'd find them ajar again. Always just a sliver. Always just enough to remind them they weren't alone. It was unsettling, but still, they rationalized. Old house, drafts, settling foundations. They told themselves stories to chase away the growing unease. They were just echoes, they thought, lingering memories of lives long past. They had no idea they were only just beginning to listen to the house. The Beckers clung to their rationalizations, but the house had a way of wearing them down. The sporadic openings of doors became more frequent. The faint music Jerry heard grew clearer, sometimes sounding like a broken music box playing a mournful tune. But it was Darla, their quiet daughter, who became the house's particular focus. Darla's invisible friend, Lily, became less imaginary, more present. Darla would sit in her room, talking to thin air, a locket hanging from her neck. She said Lily gave it to her. But sometimes Leanne would hear two distinct sets of whispers from behind the closed door. One was Darla's innocent child voice. The other was a soft, guttural murmur, too low to decipher, too regular to be Darla's own invention. It sounded like an adult, breathing secrets right into Darla's ear. Leanne's heart would clench, a cold knot of dread tightening in her chest. Then came the drawings. Darla, usually drawing cheerful stick figures and sunny skies, started sketching disturbing images. A girl with hollow eyes, standing in the corner of a room, always watching, and a tall, shadowy figure with long, grasping fingers, always looming behind her. One morning, Leanne found a new drawing. It depicted the girl from the locket, clearly identifiable from old family photos in the attic, surrounded by the same dark, grasping tendrils. Scrawled underneath in a child's shaky handwriting were 3 words: Lily wants out. Jerry, pragmatic to a fault, suggested a therapist. He dismissed the whispers as Darla's imagination and the drawings as a phase. But even he couldn't explain the cold spots. Patches of air, intensely frigid, that would appear randomly in different rooms, lingering for minutes before vanishing, and the feeling of being watched, a pervasive sense of unseen eyes tracking their movements, an invisible pressure that made the hair on the back of their necks stand on end. They began to feel like intruders in their own home. One terrifying night, Sam, their 5-year-old, woke up screaming. Not a nightmare scream, but pure, unadulterated terror. Jerry and Leanne rushed in to find him cowering in the corner of his room, pointing a trembling finger at the closet door. It was closed, but from within, they could hear it. A distinct, rhythmic scratching, like something with long, sharp nails was trying to claw its way out. Jerry yanked the closet door open, his heart in his throat. The scratching stopped instantly. The moan vanished. The growl silenced. The closet was empty. Just clothes hanging quietly. But the fear in Sam's eyes were real. And from that moment, the Beckers could no longer deny it. Their dream home was a nightmare. And the house was no longer just making its presence known. It was making its demands. Sleep became a luxury. The constant threat of unseen presences, the inexplicable sounds, Sam's terror, it all took its toll. Leanne, unable to rest, began to obsess over the house's history. She scoured online archives, dug through dusty local records at the library, anything to find an explanation for the terror gripping their lives. She sought answers in the dusty deeds and faded photographs, hoping to find a flaw, a reason to abandon this waking nightmare. What she found was disturbing. The house, known locally as Blackwood Manor, had a troubled past, a series of misfortunes, always leading to abandonment. But one story, buried deep in old newspaper clippings, caught her eye. It spoke of a family, the Blackwoods, who lived in the house over a century ago. their youngest daughter, a quiet, imaginative girl named Lillian. Lillian Blackwood. She was known to be sickly, often confined to her room. Her parents, desperate, turned to unconventional means for her recovery. The articles alluded to strange rituals, folk remedies practiced within the manor's very walls. And then, abruptly, Lillian vanished. No trace, no explanation, just a missing child and a family that eventually left the manor, never to return. The house stood empty for decades after. Leanne's blood ran cold. Lillian. Lily. Darla's invisible friend. It was too much of a coincidence. But then came the true horror. One old, yellow newspaper article, almost falling apart in her hands, detailed a bizarre local superstition from that era. When a child was gravely ill, sometimes, in their desperation, families would offer a life bond to a spirit, a ritual to exchange one life or one essence for another, a way to transfer the illness or even death to an unsuspecting vessel. Leanne gasped. The locket, the eerie feeling she got when she touched it. It wasn't just Lillian's memory, it was Lillian herself, trapped and calling out to Darla. But if Lillian was the one calling, the one communicating, what was the other presence? The one with the grasping fingers in Darla's drawings, the one that scratched from the closet. What had the Blackwoods truly bound to this house? The dream house wasn't merely haunted by a ghost. It was a prison. And Darla, their innocent daughter, was being groomed as the next unwilling occupant. The Beckers had walked into a house that wasn't just ancient. It was cursed. And the entity that held Lillian captive was now ready to claim its new tenant. The truth was a cold, sharp blade. Lillian Blackwood was not a benevolent spirit. She was a lure, a proxy for something far older, far more malevolent. And now, armed with the horrifying knowledge of the life bond ritual, Leanne and Jerry realized their perfect home wasn't just occupied. It was an elaborate trap, a trap set centuries ago. And their daughter Darla was the next chosen victim. Panic set in. They tried everything. Holy water, salt lines, burning sage. Nothing worked. The house seemed to mock their feeble attempts. Doors would slam shut with violent force, rattling the entire structure. Objects would fly across rooms, shattering against walls. The cold spots intensified, manifesting as icy breaths on their necks, even in a sealed room. And then the direct attacks began. One evening, during dinner, a porcelain plate exploded on the table, shards scattering around them. Leanne screamed. Jerry grabbed the children, shielding them as the air around them pulsed with unseen fury. They knew it wasn't Lillian. This was something else. The true master of Blackwood Manor. That night, the scratching in Sam's closet returned. But it was no longer tentative. It was a violent, relentless tearing sound. Jerry, desperate, tried to barricade the door, but the wood splintered, buckling inwards under the unseen force. From within the closet, a faint, sickly green light began to pulse through the cracks. And then, Sam began to whimper. Not from fear, but from a strange, internal chill. The growl intensified, raw and ancient, vibrating through the very foundation of the house. It was a sound of pure hunger. Leanne looked at Jerry, their faces stark white in the dim light. They couldn't stay. Not anymore. This wasn't a house. It was a hungry tomb. The house was done playing. It wanted Darla, and it was coming for her. The choice was clear: fight or lose their daughter to the entity that devoured souls in the shadows of Blackwood Manor. Jerry and Leanne made a desperate decision. They couldn't fight what they couldn't see, but they could try to break the bond. The life bond ritual. The old newspaper article had mentioned it vaguely. It was a dark, forbidden bargain. They had to somehow sever the connection between Lillian and the entity to free their daughter. Guided by a chilling, instinctual dread, and perhaps by Lillian's faint, desperate plea within Darla's innocent mind, Leanne remembered a detail from the articles. The ritual was tied to the hearth of the original Blackwood home, the very heart of the manor's energy. It was a place of sacrifice, a point of entry for the entity. Armed with only a crude iron poker and a desperate prayer, Jerry began to strike at the hearthstone. Each blow echoed with unnatural force, sending shivers through the old house. The air crackled. The whispers screamed. The entity fought back, not with physical force, but with overwhelming terror. Rooms went cold. Shadows writhed, and the very walls seemed to writhe with a silent agony. Darla began to convulse, a thin, sickly green light flickering beneath her eyelids. Lillian's small, distant voice cried out in anguish. The entity was pulling harder, trying to complete the bond, trying to claim its new puppet. Jerry hit the hearth again and again, sweat stinging his eyes, muscles screaming. Leanne clutched Sam, her gaze locked on Darla, praying for a miracle. With a final, agonizing swing, Jerry's poker struck true. The ancient hearthstone splintered, cracks spiderwebbing across its surface. Silence. Heavy, absolute. Darla's body went limp. The green light vanished from her eyes. For a horrifying moment, Leanne thought they had failed, that they had broken the house, and in doing so, lost their daughter forever. But then, Darla's eyes fluttered open. Her own eyes, wide, clear, terrified, but undeniably hers. They had done it. They had broken the bond. The entity was gone. The house felt empty, not welcoming, but no longer predatory. They carried their children out of Blackwood Manor under the rising sun, never looking back. They sold the house for a pittance, desperate to sever all ties. They escaped. They survived. They won. Years passed. The Beckers rebuilt their lives. Darla grew up, a bright, happy young woman. The horrors of Blackwood Manor faded into a distant, unbelievable memory. They convinced themselves it was over, that the house's evil was contained within its cursed walls. But some bargains have unforeseen consequences, and some bonds merely change form. The bond is transferred. The bond is transferred. Welcome. Stay tuned.